Good morning. Who would dare to say that the working man can't make a good living in British Columbia? This morning you're going to meet Ray Rebagliati, a brakeman conductor on the BC Rail, who in 1979 chalked up by hard work and good union agreements $70,000 in his annual salary. Rebagliati you'll love. Also this morning is a man here by the name of Mazankowski, to whom $70,000 is a mere crumb, because he's been out on the west coast here as the Tory transportation and wheat czar, promising millions upon millions upon millions. But after all, it is election time, and we haven't met Mr. Mazankowski before, so we'll have him this morning. Later in the program, deadly serious interview. We all know Okalla's had problems for a long, long time, especially Okalla's women's unit. There's a lot of garbage talked about that Okalla women's unit, and we're going to try and get through to some of the truths about Okalla women's unit in an interview later on this program with Marie Peacock, who runs it. But first, Ray Rebagliati. Everybody knows that BC Rail is a shambles. Everybody knows that it is bankrupt. Everybody knows that if it's not on strike, it's off the rails. A new contract is in the process, hopefully, of being signed, a 30-month contract for the employees of the unions on BC Rail. And you're going to meet Ray Rebagliati, and he's going to tell you how much he made last year and how much he had to work for it. Here is Mr. Rebagliati. I want you to meet my friend, Ray Rebagliati. How do you do, Ray?
How do you do, sir?
You're a celebrated individual in British Columbia these days. Are you pleased about it, or are you not?
Doesn't bother me one way or the other.
Now, Ray, what do you do for a living?
Trainman, conductor, BC Railway.
BC Railway. And you're living in?
Lillooet.
Lillooet. Well, a nosy friend of mine called Dobie printed what's going to be your income for 1979 as a trainman conductor. How much?
Oh, in the neighborhood of $69,000.
Wouldn't your retroactive bring it up to more than 69?
I have no idea what the retroactive will be at the present time, probably over 70.
A lot of people will be saying, hey, there's a guy on the BC Rail made close to 70 or a little over as a trainman conductor. How can it be done?
Oh, we work long hours, but you must remember there's only 2 or 3 of us that can do it.
What do you mean only 2 or 3 of you can do it?
Well, the top 2 or 3 on the seniority list are jobs or premium that pay that kind of money.
So how would you describe yourself in terms of your work?
Oh, you could call me a workaholic, I guess.
You're what? How old now?
55.
When did you start on the railway?
I was 21, 34 years ago.
So you remember what's now the UTU?
Yes, that's correct.
How many hours a day do you work?
17, average 17.
How many days a week?
7 days a week. 10 and a half months.
17 hours a day, 7 days a week, 10 and a half months a year?
Well, that's what I worked last year.
You're going to do the same next year?
No.
Why not?
Well, I was only out there to build up my pension.
Oh, what would that do for your pension?
Well, it should give me an extra, should allow me to retire at 55 with a pension that I would have to wait till I was normally 60 to get.
Or do you average your 5 best years?
5 best out of any 10, yeah.
Being nosy anyway, we'll say you made 70, dead on the nose for 79. Can you remember what you made the year before?
Oh, 62.
And before that you'd be in the 50s.
No, it was way down, around the 30s.
Around the 30s. So putting in your long hours will bring up your pension to probably save you 10 years additional work.
That was the object of the whole thing.
Is it not a fact, Ray Rebagliati, that you've put in enough hours now as if you had worked to 65?
That's correct. That's why I'm going to pack her in.
Now, you know, I made $1 myself over the years. I'm worried about the amount of income tax you've been paying. People will say, hey, Rebagliati, $70,000. Would you care to tell me how much you get to keep?
Oh, towards the end of the year, I was probably making 33 cents on the dollar. I paid about $33,000, $35,000 income tax on that amount.
Breaks your heart, doesn't it?
Yeah, kind of.
Matter of fact, you're supporting the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, and a number of people in human resources.
And a few others.
It's the seniority that enables you to... You can pick your runs, can you?
That is correct, yeah.
So you leave the house what time in the morning?
I don't stay in the house. I live right on the job.
Oh, what do you mean?
Well, I live on an outfit car with a work train. I have no home life, no family life. I'm away from home.
Away from home all the time?
Well, take the odd week off once in a while and slip home.
Oh, so you get on your work train at your base. Where would your base be, in Lillooet?
No, up in north of Fort St. John.
And you live in that train?
That's correct.
And that's why you get credited 17 hours a day and the other time you're sleeping?
Well, I don't get paid for sleeping.
No, I realize that. And then how often will you get back to your house in Lillooet?
Oh, so once every 3 months.
You deserve your $70,000.
That's right. When you look at it that way, yes.
Is that how you feel about it?
Oh, yeah, sure. I'm not a bit ashamed of it.
The fact is, you make the big money, you pay the big income tax, and you work forever.
No, I was working for a pension. That's all I'm doing.
Yeah. Do you think it's a bad system, though, that allows you to do that? Maybe it creates a bit of jealousy among younger fellows.
Definitely. They're all the biggest percentage of them are going to be glad to see me go, and somebody else will step into that job.
And make the money.
That is correct.
Where do I remember the name Rebagliati from?
Lytton?
Lytton.
Lytton.
Old-time family in Lytton.
Old-time family, yeah.
And where are you going to retire?
Oh, Lillooet for the time being.
Give my regards to Mom Murray.
I will.
Ray, thanks very much indeed. It's a pleasure to speak to a guy who's not ashamed of the money he makes and answers straightforward questions simply.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ray. That was a gem, and he's a gem. Although the system, or the situation, as Dobie said in his headline, typifies some of the problems on the dearly beloved British Columbia Railroad, whose management certainly needs a little jolt now and again. I was just entranced by that interview of mine. Were you not too, Mr. Mazenkowski?
Yes, very much so.
Matter of
Frankness
fact,
and candor.
I'm going to ask you how much money you make as a federal cabinet minister when we get down to dealing with you as the Tory czar of transportation, wheat and whatnot, after the break. I can't get my good friend Ray Rebagliati, the BCR trainman conductor who made $70,000 last year. So to Don Mazenkowski, federal cabinet minister, at least until the 18th of February, carrying the heat and burden of the day, how much money do you make in a year?
I'm not sure precisely. It's in the order of $50,000 to $60,000, but I can tell you I work as many hours as Ray Rebagliati.
7 days a week?
7 days a week.
And you get home just about as often?
Yeah, that's true.
During an election campaign?
Well, even in a non-election campaign. My wife and family live out in Vegreville, and I try to get back home to the riding every weekend and have my regular office
You mentioned the magic word. You're the second person I've met from Vegreville. Who else comes from Vegreville?
Oh, the person you're probably thinking of is Sima Holt.
Someone who's running against you. Against your party.
Well, she's not running against me. She said that if she was in Vegreville, she would support me.
Uh-oh.
Yes.
She'll want equal time on that. Now let's get down to business. Are you going to accept and adopt the former Prime Minister Trudeau's magnificent suggestion of an extra, is it a double rail line or an extra rail line from the prairies to the coast? And when are you going to build it? And how much is it going to cost? And why haven't you done it already?
That's a silly proposition, and it is the most extravagant waste of resources that one had ever heard of. And it really clearly demonstrates the lack of understanding of a man that has been the Prime Minister of this country for more than 10 years, and his pitch to Western Canada by the promise of a double track clearly demonstrates the naivety of the man in terms of facing the transportation problems, but more important, the naivety of the problems that afflict Western Canada. It's disgraceful.
Problems are not in your rail lines. The problems are in your rail cars, your port facilities, the occasional bit of labor trouble, and the fact that your new czar, Dr. Horner, he doesn't seem to have achieved much in the way of an improvement of shipment of grain to the coast, does he?
Well, he has just put his office into place starting November.
Here?
And, no, he's got an office in Winnipeg, and he will be providing satellite offices in Vancouver and Edmonton. That work is carried on, but you're absolutely right. You should be in the transportation business. The problem is in the port congestion, lack of rolling stock, lack of motive power, and in the 6 short months that we have been in office, we have addressed each of those problems. We have enough rolling stock coming on stream between now and 1981 to move 50% more grain than we have. We've got commitment from the railways to provide enough motive power to pull that rolling stock, and we've just recently concluded all the necessary agreements to advance on the development of the port of Prince Rupert.
Leave that for a minute. Leave that for a minute. Let's get back to grain, which is a deadly serious subject in this
Very
town.
much so.
One of the basic problems, as I understand it from my spies in the industry, is that the elevators are often full with non-board items because the shippers of non-board items get stuck with expensive demurrage, and that your wheat exports are often held up by the wrong allocation of elevator space by some of the big companies.
That's precisely why we got a grain transportation coordinator to sort this out.
I'm right on that, am I not?
Well, that's a bit of the problem, but it clearly demonstrates a lack of an adequate transportation system, because there's X amount of bushels of grain to move, whether it's board or non-board grain. That grain has to move either domestically or to the export market. And it's a matter of coordinating that movement in an orderly fashion so that the right type of grain arrives at the time the ship arrives. And there has not been that kind of coordination. There will be that kind of coordination when we can beef up the capacity of the system, and when Mr. Horner gets a handle on things, and we give him perhaps additional powers that he may require. There has not been anyone in charge of the transportation system.
It's just a pity that somebody in Ottawa didn't look at the BC rail plant, the rail car plant at Squamish, find a way to subsidize it, because God knows you're promising millions and billions, and we could have built a lot of your rail cars in British Columbia. Liberals wouldn't touch it with a barge pole. Perot ran around here doing fancy footwork for months. And of course, probably dead now, but why not do that for Western Canada? I can understand you turning down the Trident, it's just not viable.
Jack,
but rail cars for export, surely you should be looking at building some of them on the West Coast.
Jack, I'm not going around promising millions and billions of dollars. I'm simply doing my job. And the fact that we're developing port facilities and spending some money on the West Coast is not a matter of patronage. It's a matter of getting the job done. We've identified the deficiencies, and we've identified where the problems are, and we're acting on them. We're not sitting around and mulling around. We've developed comprehensive programs, not only for today, but for tomorrow, and we're looking into the future because we want to increase our grain export capability by 50% by the year 1995. That's good for BC. That's good for Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba. It's good for Eastern Canada, and incidentally, the cars that are being manufactured are all being manufactured in Canada. And
Eastern Canada.
Eastern and Central Canada.
Point of information, sir. Point of information. You're not going to sit here and just get away with Mazenkowski stuff when you talk like that. Crosby came up with about $50 million for Newfoundland. You have a cabinet minister who I used to think had lots of common sense, called David MacDonald. Comes out here the other day, goes crazy on culture. Oh, we'll pick up all the deficits of all the art groups, the symphony groups, and he promises $4 million to the Vancouver Art Gallery people who want to move in and destroy, in effect, one of our historic buildings. Who advised him on that one?
Well, he didn't get his advice from me because I'm not in charge of culture. I'm a technician. I want to move grain and I want to move resources.
To make the point, Donald, you know, that it's great to talk about industry, but the little people think subsidizing, picking up all the deficits of inefficient artistic groups, is this the Tory government that we look for good, tough leadership?
Well, there's good, tough leadership coming from our department, and I'm not the Prime Minister, and I'm not the overall cabinet czar.
All right, let me give you another point of information. You're talking about $294 million, is it, for the development of the facilities at Prince Rupert?
Yeah, and the bulk of that is going to be funded by the private sector and not by the federal government. We're providing the infrastructure, as it is our responsibility to do.
What is infrastructure?
Well, the utilities, the development of the access, natural gas, water, those kinds of things. That is a federal government responsibility. We're going to be spending $44 million in the development of that. Now, surely you're not going to criticize the federal government for providing that kind of funding when the private sector is going to put up upwards of $240 to $250 million.
How much is the Alberta government putting in?
They've indicated that they will provide the financing to the grain consortium for the development of that, for the building of that facility at a very reasonable rate of interest. The other thing is that the British Columbia government has participated as well in terms of the potential for coal development. By 1990, we have the potential of moving upwards of 5 million metric tons of coal out of the port of Prince Rupert. And that's good for British Columbia, that's good for Western Canada, that's good for Canada.
Why haven't you promised a bigger and better development there for at Point Roberts?
Well, that will be coming, and it's being actively considered at the present time.
Announcement before February 18?
I would suspect so.
Webster and Don Mazinkowski, Minister of Transportation and the man in charge of the Canadian Wheat Board, after the break. As a fairly serious observer of international affairs, that's me. I don't know about you. I nearly died last night. Did you see Clark Gifford on television?
No, I didn't. We don't watch television when we're on the hustings.
All it said was that if the Russians move into the Persian Gulf, it means war. Right. You know, nothing really to worry about. We're not exactly enthusiastically helping the American cause in our wheat exports, are we?
Oh yes, we have. We have supported the policy of the United States government in terms of the embargo that has been placed upon the deliveries to the USSR, in concert with the other grain exporting nations, and we
don't have any embargo, do we?
Well, neither of the Americans in total. They're still moving 8 million metric tons of grain to the Russians, which is basically food grain. We're going to continue to move our traditional normal level of sales, but we pledged to the Americans that we would not move in to take advantage of the withdrawal of the 17 million metric tons, and that is precisely what they asked us to do, and that's what we are doing.
In other words, we're going to deliver, hopefully, every grain of wheat or whatever it is that we've sold to them, but nothing extra.
We're obliged to fulfill our contractual commitments, and that is what we made very clear to the United States, and they agreed to that because that is precisely what they are doing.
They've cut theirs back.
Oh no, they're 8 million metric tons, which they're committed to. The 17 million metric tons was in addition to their long-term agreement.
That was they're going to give $2.5 billion subsidy to the farmers because of the lack of sales.
They are going to subsidize the farmers. They are going to withdraw that 17 million metric tons from the market so it doesn't depress world prices, and that's important if you're going to ensure that you have sufficient production.
Let me see if I get this clear. In other words, they're not going to dump that 17 million extra on the market, which would make it difficult for us to maintain our traditional customers.
Well, that's precisely correct, and it would have the benefit of reducing prices, which would affect the production patterns. And the only way that you can have stability and security as far as food grains are concerned is to ensure that you have a price level that is attractive enough to encourage the production. We have acted in concert with the other grain exporting nations. The United States is a member, Australia, Argentina.
Hasn't Australia double-crossed them?
No, Argentina has given qualified support, but Australia has followed the same position that we have.
Except they've moved in to pick up the stuff in Iran. That's what I'm thinking of. The Australians are selling so many 100,000 tons to Iran.
I'm not aware of that, but I can assure you once again that we have acted in concert with the other exporting nations in full support of the United States, and we have not. The USSR has been a customer that has fluctuated. We've sold them as high as 5 million metric tons in a year, and we've sold them as little as 328,000 tons in a year. And so the mean average is about 3 million metric tons, and that's what we would be prepared to ship to them. But our problem is not a lack of sales. We've got lots of sales. We've got lots of market for our grain. Our problem is one of moving the grain to export position, and that's my problem, and that's what we've been addressing.
Okay, next thing. Well, you've already been talking about this. Most Canadians are vaguely ashamed, if not actively ashamed, of our Coast Guard role on this coast. We're ashamed under the Tories and we're ashamed under the Liberals. Because any time there's an emergency, who comes to the rescue? It takes us hours to get a non-rescue helicopter off the ground after that sinking of that big ship out here on the coast. And the Americans, God bless them, They do more rescues on our coast with their equipment than we do. Now, I don't suppose that you really mean to give us an effective life-saving system on the West Coast here. And I mean, when I say you, I mean you and the Liberals.
Well, we're not only ashamed on the West Coast, we're ashamed on the East Coast as well. And we've addressed that matter. One of the first priorities when I took over as a Minister of Transport, my departmental officials had put together a program, a capital fleet investment program for the Coast Guard. We accepted that program and acted on it, and it is reflected in the estimates which are going to be introduced in February, calling for the re-equipment of the Coast Guard fleet over a 30-year period, evaluated on a 5-year segmental basis, will amount to some $250 million, which is earmarked for this next 5-year period. That is in the estimates. Those funds are committed, and we will be spending an amount equal to 4% of the total capital on an annual basis. Now, in terms of search and rescue, we've provided funding for 9 additional vessels, 4 of the 21-meter class. 2 of those 4 will be situated on the West Coast. We're moving in.
When?
Well, they're coming. One is going to be delivered in June or July of 1980, and the other one will be delivered the following year. We've identified the problem. We see the Coast Guard in much the same light as we see our Canadian Armed Forces.
They're a shambles.
That's right. But there has not been, they've been ignored, and there has not been a firm commitment of expenditures towards re-equipping. We've got an aging fleet, obsolescence advancing.
Have you ever looked at our Navy?
Well, that's not my job. My hands are full moving wheat and trying
even if I believe you, will you buy us a couple of decent helicopters that are available around the clock, especially when the herring fleet is out? Big rescue helicopters that can do the job?
Well, I can assure you that after my visit to British Columbia this week, it's been impressed upon me the more than ever the importance of it.
It's been a shocker for years.
Well, rather than fighting an election right now, that's what we should be doing. And this visit to British Columbia is not caused as a result of the election campaign. I had this trip scheduled long before the election was called, and it's part of the ongoing process. And it's one of those. It's a clear example of not having had the chance to do the job properly.
Is it not a fact, though, that we needn't have had the election at all? A few people have been half awake, delayed the budget, made a deal with social credit.
Jack, I've been in the House of Commons for 12 years. Never in the 12 years of my experience in the House of Commons have I seen the filibustering, the obstruction, the outright frustration of the House of Commons as we saw in the 2 months that this House was in session. The combined forces of the Liberals and the NDP tried to defeat us on 6 different occasions within 2 months. And you recall the previous non-confidence vote, we won it by 1 vote. Now, how can a government withstand and function in that kind of a frustrating climate?
Well, maybe you can tell me, or maybe some people will tell you too, because I'm going to go to the phones with you. See what they think of Mazinkowski. First time the face has been seen with Webster, anyway, isn't it?
I guess that's right.
After this commercial break. Don Mazinkowski is proper title. He's in charge of transportation and in charge of the wheat board. Now, okay, you're secure in Vegreville. Who's running against you? I mean, what was your majority the last time?
I had 79% of the vote. We did, my team and I.
Okay, there's 2 Liberals, Axworthy and Phillips. You can't tell me about Phillips, but you can tell me about Axworthy. He's supposed to be leadership material once Trudeau gets re-elected and quits.
Yes, he is.
Will he hold his seat?
I haven't been in Manitoba. I'm going there next week. My understanding is that we have an opportunity of picking up some of the seats that we lost in the last election, which we should not have lost. And I think that grain handling and transportation and grain markets are very key issues out there. And quite frankly, we have developed a spirit of optimism and confidence as a result of some of our initiatives. And
Jack Horner's running again.
Jack Horner is running again. He runs. Jack Horner's running in the riding that neighbors mine, just to the south, and he.
Well, if Trudeau gets back in, as the Eastern Media Mafia says, as was saying a week ago, that means at least he'll be a senator. Is that not right?
Well, I think all the Senate positions are filled in the
You
province
filled
of
them.
Alberta now. Well, we filled one, that's right. There was one vacancy.
You know, you really should count your blessings. Because 3 or 4 weeks ago, Joe was a stumble bum on foreign affairs because of Jerusalem. And now Joe's a hero. Would you agree? That the Iranian situation, well handled by Mr. Taylor, and I'm sure with the cooperation of the government and everybody else, that is the issue which you are counting on to turn the tide of the emotions of Canadians and the image of Prime Minister Clark.
Well, I think that incident has generated a lot of pride in the minds of Canadians. On the campaign trail, I ran into some people that indicated to me that, you know, for the first time in a long time, I'm proud to be a Canadian. It was a real act of bravery on the part of Canadian officials and supported by the government. I suppose it has a reflection upon the campaign.
Oh, don't be so modest. It's manna from heaven.
Well, I'm a modest and moderate fellow, Jack, and I've always been that way, and I wouldn't want to gloat over something that took place, which was largely orchestrated by Canadian officials, by the very commendable performance of our staff in our Canadian embassies. And I think that they are unsung heroes in the eyes of many Canadians.
Well, I don't like the backroom boys who do up your advertising or the Liberals' advertising. Somebody was smart enough to advise Mr. Clark, or he was smart enough not to televise his end of the of the telephone call with Carter. Did you notice that?
I'm not in charge of the advertising.
No, that was clever. That was clever. Clark made the phone call, and what's his name? No. Carter made the phone call, and Clark stayed in the privacy of his office. He held a little press conference afterwards. Right now, you going to predict the election at all for me? I mean, really? Don't you feel there's a big danger that the NDP, with this magnificently smooth, reasonable, small L liberal advertising of broadbands, that they could well be the real balance of power in the next House?
Well, the NDP are the spoilers, and really, in terms of providing stability to the government of Canada, they are in effect a menace. And you know, their performance, in terms of particularly their performance, the performance of the Western members of the NDP caucus, I found very strange, and I couldn't really explain their actions, because this government has taken a number of initiatives which would benefit Western Canada, and these people literally obstructed and opposed every initiative that we took on behalf of Western Canada. And I find that very strange, and I find it very difficult to explain. And I'm sure they should spend some time in trying to explain their actions to their constituents.
Would you care to pick out anybody by name?
No, I'm talking about them as a group, because they seem to be bent and determined to defeat this government from the time Parliament opened. And I find that very hard to explain, particularly the Western Prairie members, wherein they agreed with the initiatives that we were taking insofar as improving the grain handling and transportation system, but yet in the House of Commons they opposed literally every initiative that we undertook.
Well, they're in opposition. They want to see you out. They want to see the Liberals cut down to size. They want to control the next Liberal government.
Well, that may very well be. They've been quite successful, and that's why we've got the record of deficits and increasing deficits that have been piled up since the Liberal NDP alliance occurred back in 72, 73.
Okay, I'm going to go to telephones, and that'll be your camera for talking to people when they come up on the telephone. Go ahead to Don Mazenkowski.
Yes, Jack, I'd like to direct all this to His Imperial Highness there.
Well, I'm sure he's blushing with modesty, but what are your questions?
Well, I'd like to know, first off, what is the reason why the Coast Guard has 2 marine colleges back east, none on the west coast? Secondly, I'd like to know why we get the smallest Coast Guard vessels. We built 2 fairly large Coast Guard ships a couple of years ago, if you remember. One by Yarrows, one by Burrard. They were shipped east. We get 2 61-footers to combat seas in the neighborhood of the Gulf of Alaska, the west coast, and I understand you've sailed extensively, Jack.
Oh, yes, I have. Anyway, I get the point. Here's a man expressing discontent with past policies on feeble efforts of the Coast Guard on the west coast. And he's saying specifically, more alienation, and you're a Westerner, 2 training colleges in the east coast, None on the Pacific.
Well, I hope he's not suggesting that that was a policy of this government. If we had an opportunity to turn it around, we certainly didn't have enough time to do that. And I appreciate the comments that the gentleman is making, and I share his views. And I can say to him that I'm getting that feeling expressed very loud and clear. And I will certainly act in a manner consistent with the observations that have been made and the representations that have been made to me.
Anything else, briefly?
Yes, briefly, the Iranian situation. It's commendable. I probably would have done the same, but let us not forget that what they did was in fact illegal.
What was illegal?
They issued false passports.
Oh, come off it. I can't let you away with that piece of stupidity when I see Gottsbade, who went to Notre Dame University up here, accusing us of foul things. They're holding 50 people hostages.
Illegally.
They're the criminals in it. They're the terrorists in it. I hope we would have done this for the French or the British or, for that matter, even for the Russians.
Absolutely. Like I say, I would have been tempted to do it myself.
Oh, illegal, Schmiegel. You spoiled a good call, that fellow. Go ahead, please.
Good morning, Jack.
Morning.
May I address two questions to the Minister of Transport here?
Yes, yes.
Yes. One of them is, whatever happened to the Office of Shipping Master for the Port of Vancouver? It's been absorbed by a two-bit bureaucrat inside this thing called the Canadian Coast Guard, which is a farce. I am a sailor. And I must point this out to you, that the oath of office.
Forget the oath of office. Was the shipping master, do you know anything about the shipping master thing?
I'm not aware of
Beyond our knowledge.
I'm not aware of that.
Now, don't cut me off, Jack.
I know, but I'm not on about oath of office. You've already called somebody two-bit. I don't know if there's somebody real life involved.
Well, the reason I'm saying this is because it's a very specified office.
No, too technical for me. Where from? Castlegar, BC, to Don Mazenkowski.
Good morning, Jack. I have a word for the minister. Minister Mazenkowski, the Progressive Conservative Party and you are our answer to the problems of this great country. We think you are great. Keep up the good work.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
You don't
Can you
have to
turn on
answer
any
that.
more like
No.
that, Jack?
Fulford Harbor.
Fulford Harbor. This is a member of the Jack Webster Fulford Harbor Fan Club. How are you this morning, Jack?
Not bad. Go ahead.
Good. We would like to ask the Honorable Minister if one of the reasons that the West Coast is neglected in some extent is due to the money and personnel that goes to the island of Haiti.
You're talking about assistance, something like, I think it's a $30 million assistance program to that beautiful democracy in the Caribbean.
Well, why can't we have some of the benevolence out here on the West Coast? We are Canadians.
Jack has just finished accusing me of coming out and spending hundreds of millions of dollars in British Columbia. This government has not ignored Western Canada. It has not ignored British Columbia, and you are now seeing some of the results of the initiatives that we have and the policies that we have developed, which will assist not only British Columbia, but Western Canada and the whole
What
of Canada.
he's asking you is, are you prepared to stop foreign aid to countries like Haiti?
What is the development in Haiti? We'd like to know, what are you doing
Oh, God
there?
knows.
It's sort of
but no,
under the barrel.
there was an article in the Globe and Mail about it the other day. But
I'm not aware of what we're spending on Haiti, but I can assure you, as a minister responsible for transportation and knowing the difficulties that we have in transportation and Coast Guard and things of that nature, I am certainly trying to get my share of the dollar out of the minister in charge of the Treasury Board.
you don't want to get into the field of foreign aid.
No, I'm not qualified for that.
Okay.
What's going on in Haiti so that we can learn about it out here eventually.
Well, I'll be pleased to look into it. And
The only way you'll find out is to read the Globe and Mail. Thanks for calling anyway, and keep watching. Webster and Don Mazenkowski after the break. Phone calls to Don Mazenkowski from Vegreville, Alberta, Sima Holt's hometown. Did you know Sima in Vegreville?
No, I didn't know Sima.
Met her in the House of Commons.
Met her in the House of Commons. She left Vegreville before I arrived. I moved into Vegreville in 1959, but I didn't know her family and
This is a newcomer.
brothers and sisters.
Go ahead, please.
Mr. Mazenkowski,
Yes.
as Minister of Transport, would you, if you were elected again and hold the same portfolio, what is your quickest move you could make
to give us our own bottoms to move all our raw materials out to these countries that are capitalizing on it.
We're in the process of developing programs and policies for that right at the present time. It was a very firm plank in our election platform of 1979. It was referred to in the speech from the throne. We're now going through the consultative process with the shipping companies, customers, etc., in an attempt to devise the kinds of incentives that would be necessary to encourage the registration of Canadian-owned vessels.
Hold it, Don. You're talking like a bureaucrat.
No, I'm not talking like a bureaucrat.
You are.
This is in fact going on. The
But
discussions
first of all,
have been-
he says bottoms. He means a Canadian merchant marine, doesn't he?
That's what I'm talking
He means
about.
Canadian ships built in Canada.
That's what I'm
Now,
talking about.
By incentives, what do you mean? What incentives? Do you mean
Well,
tax incentives?
Tax incentives.
Subsidies to build ships?
We're not talking about subsidies. We're talking about tax incentives. We're talking about a program for accelerated depreciation, much the same kind of things that we give foreign countries. For example, a Canadian shipping company has to pay more interest when he buys a Canadian ship than foreign countries do when they finance through the Export Development Corporation. It's these kinds of things, very simple, but very creative in terms of providing a positive climate for the gradual redevelopment of a merchant marine.
Well, now with the living standards and wages on these other registered ships going up, we can almost afford to run a merchant marine.
Well, that's quite true.
At Canadian levels.
And this is clearly one area where labor and management are clearly on the same wavelength and working together. And the cost of manning the ships is no longer the problem that it was a few years ago.
Do you remember, I'm going to ask the caller a question. What was that story I remember, which was a big kind of scandal here, where massive government subsidies were given to build certain kinds of ships, and then once they got the ships built on taxpayer subsidies, they sold them abroad, remember?
Correct.
What kind of ships were those?
Those were the park boats, Jack.
No, it's after the park boats.
If you can remember, I want to ask I want to ask him if there was a war started, heaven say that there isn't, but if there was a war started, how quick they would be building a merchant marine without all this looking into and see what subsidies they can put out and everything else. They would build those ships so damnable fast it wouldn't even be funny. And then after it was all over, they would sell them to another registry.
Well, this government is committed to the gradual redevelopment of a merchant marine. We've clearly indicated that, where our discussions have been going on with the shipping companies. They are very encouraged and are very positive in the steps that we have taken. And another one of the interruptions is a result of the election. And I'm sure that we would be well on our way at this time.
Parliament after you got in.
Hey?
It took you 6 months to call Parliament after you got in.
Yeah, what about that?
It didn't take 6 months.
4 months.
It took some time to get our house in order and to review the morass that was left.
Yeah, you've admitted mistakes. Some of you people have admitted you spent far too much time trying to learn your department instead of going out whipping up the people.
Well, the difference with this government and other governments is that we've admitted when we've erred, and we've been open, we've been frank, we've been honest, we've ended the confrontation with the provinces. It's been a new style government, and our government has been conducted in the style of openness, freedom of information.
Okay, boy, go ahead, please.
Yes, Mr. Mazinkowski, I'm one of the large percentage of undecided voters, undecided whether to vote for your party or not at all. Let's assume for a minute that you've got every inch of track from the Ontario border to the West Coast double tracked, and you've got the grain storage facilities quadrupled. Now, assume that to be a fact, you've still got a problem. And my question to you is this, I would like an answer without waffling. What would your government plan to do to curb the militancy of the grain handlers union that will not handle the grain during the nice summer months? They go out fishing and will only work the shifts that pay them double time. Now, I would like a straightforward answer.
Well, I'm not going to get involved in finger pointing. That's what happened before. We had the various components of the grain handling and transportation system blaming each other for the failure to do the job. We have tried to work together as a team in a cooperative effort, and we have, as a result of that, we have produced some results. In terms of in answer to your specific question, we intend to introduce legislation which would establish a public interest disputes commission, which would go a long way to alleviating that problem.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, Mr. Mazankowski. What I wanted to ask you about was this, the federal excise tax on gasoline. We hear a lot about that at 18 cents, and which actually is 20 because the federal tax is calculated on the excise tax. But the one that really concerns me, and I think that has got very little coverage in the press, is the 27 cent a gallon increase on diesel fuel. That is just going to do incredible things to BC in terms of the transportation costs. For instance, BC Ferries alone, it would increase their bill by about $40 million a year. And the towing industry, I think C-SPAN alone would probably increase their bill by $12 million. That's before any of the other increases. It's been so little said about this, and it's just a horrendous tax. It's just going to do terrible things to our industry because we have such fuel-intensive industry out here. Plus, everything we have is freighted from the east.
Well, there's a horrendous bill to pay every time we import a barrel of oil into Canada. It works out to a subsidy of in the order of $20 per barrel, which is costing the Canadian Treasury something in the order of $2 billion on an annual basis. That money has to come from somewhere. Should it come from the non-users of energy, or should it come from the users of energy? We also need this money to encourage the development of alternative sources of energy and to encourage the development of further sources of oil supply. We have the potential in this country of being self-sufficient in oil. We have the potential of developing those resources. And this country was self-sufficient in energy back in 1975 because of an absence of an effective energy policy. We have now found ourselves reliant and dependent upon foreign sources which are not secure. We've got to address that problem now. If we fail to do it now, it will become increasingly complex in the future. And there are a number of incentives in that budget to encourage and to shift the consumption of energy from non-renewable sources to renewable sources, such as the production of gasohol and things of that nature. And we cannot completely insulate or isolate ourselves from the realities of the world marketplace.
Let me ask you a question. Where did you get the 40 million figure for BC Ferries?
Well, I think they burn approximately 30 million gallons of fuel a year.
Well, 30 million times 27 cents a gallon isn't 40 million, is it?
No, that's true,
yeah. Yeah, it's a lot of money, though.
Deceiving about the 18...
Anyway, it's a good point that I didn't realize that there was 27 cents going on diesel fuel.
It's 25.
25 cents in diesel fuel. Thanks for your call.
I should say as well here, Jack, that most provinces have a fairly hefty tax on diesel fuel. The province of Ontario has a 27-cent sales tax on diesel fuel, 21 cents on car gasoline. The province of Saskatchewan has a sales tax of 21 cents, 19 cents, I believe, on car gasoline and 21 cents on diesel fuel. The federal government isn't the only culprit here.
No, we know that, but we know there's only one taxpayer.
Indeed.
Webster, and one more segment with Don Mazankowski after the break. Well, it shouldn't be the least bit surprised to get all these maritime and wheatboard questions from the very intelligent and perceptive and knowledgeable callers to this program.
Very much so, and I want to say that of all the more fascinating parts of the transportation portfolio, and I say this as a person that comes from a landlocked province, I'm really fascinated by the potential of the marine sector. It is a very, very important industry to Canada. It's a $25 billion industry which has been ignored and has not been developed, and as a result we have not lived up to our full potential.
Are you in charge of the Harbours Board too?
Yes, that's right. And the whole question of marine transportation.
Lack of autonomy, unfair treatment on the West Coast. All the money goes to the East Coast. We get ignored and ignored and ignored.
Lack of autonomy, and that is going to be turned around.
Kamloops, please, go ahead.
3 quick points, Jack, for Don Mazankowski, rather. On the Coast Guard, is it not the truth that the bulk of the shipping on that travels through the Pacific coastal waters travels the route of the Great Circle North, from as far south to San Francisco and in reaching the Orient, that in fact, bearing in mind that the Canadian Pacific coast is approximately 20% of the North American coastline.
Yeah, what's the point?
The Alaska Panhandle. that we should expect that the American Coast Guard should pick up much of the rescue missions in the Canadian coastal waters. They're benefiting by the mass amount of shipping that is reaching their coast through Canadian waters or off the Canadian waters down into San Francisco. So I think that the pressure or the comparison of the East Coast and the West Coast is rather an unfair one.
Well, I'm talking about incidents that happen on the Inside Passage between Prince Rupert and Vancouver. Don't tell me these are American waters.
No, I realize that, but when you get to Prince Rupert, you're very close to the American.
Oh, yeah. Question to the minister, not to me. No. Should the Americans carry a major share of the protection of shipping in our territories?
Well, as a matter of fact, we are cooperating with the Americans. We just recently signed a new agreement for vessel traffic management, and these are a number of areas that we can cooperate and work out together. And with the increase, the potential increase of tanker traffic, it's all that more vital and more important that we have to work these things out together.
What I'm saying is I'm sure that the Americans are quite happy to bear more than their share, that is being a share on an equal basis. Because of the coastline situation, the Aleutians through to Prince Rupert represents a tremendous coastline.
I think you made a good point, sir. Right. Sure, swap. Go ahead to Don Mazankowski.
Yes, thank you, Jack. Hello, Muzzy. I just wanted to say, keep up the good work. We're all behind you out here.
Just a minute.
What's
this Muzzy business? Do you know him?
I do.
Oh, where from? Vegreville?
That's right.
Is that what they call you?
Well, a Maz, with a name like Mazankowski, it tends to be maligned from time to time. It's not simple and sweet and succinct like Webster.
Like Webster. Okay, and what's your first name?
Mine?
Uh-huh.
Maggie.
When you and I were young, Maggie.
Yeah. Okay, thanks, Maggie. Thanks, Muzzy. Maggie and Muzzy. Go ahead, please.
Morning, Jack. I'd like to put a question to the minister concerning safety record on Canadian railroads. I was in England shortly after the Mississauga rail disaster,
right.
And there was a program there on television, and they were comparing the safety record here to France, and they said that the number of accidents on our railroads were 10 times as high as the French. Would you like to comment on this?
Well, we've got 96,000 kilometers of rail in Canada, and we've got some difficult terrain and difficult climatic conditions to function in. There has been a recognition that safety is a matter of increasing concern, particularly with respect to the movement of dangerous goods. We've acted on two fronts. We've introduced a bill for the transportation of dangerous goods, which was killed when the House was dissolved. We've also ordered an inquiry into all aspects related to railway safety, the adequacy of regulations, the adequacy of inspections, and this is currently being going on, as we've done in air. There's been a rash of incidents with respect to civil aviation, and we ordered an inquiry into civil aviation air safety back in July.
Is it a fact that Mirabel Airport was one of the biggest boondoggles of the Liberals, or are you going to pour more billions into it?
Well, at the present time, it's my problem. I didn't create it, and thank God that we moved in '72 and killed Pickering, because I'd have had two white elephants to deal with at the present time, which are very costly to the Canadian taxpayer.
Mirabel is undoubtedly.
Well, it's the operations and maintenance are a drain on my budget of about $52 million a year.
Is it being used at all?
Well, it's being used, and we've got the airport there, and we're going to have to find ways and means of utilizing it more. And we're going to be shifting in an increasing manner the traffic out of Dorval to Mirabel, because at the present time, we need the two facilities, because to move all the flights from one to the other, we would have to spend more money. So it's a matter of synchronizing and coordinating the movement in an orderly fashion.
Well, Muzzy. Don Mazankowski. That's about it for this morning. We'll know on February 18th whether your evangelistic fervor on the West Coast has done you additional good, or whether the power and the presence of the charismatic Trudeau is going to just slaughter you without regards to valuation.
Well, I don't think it's charisma that runs the country. It's addressing the problems of the country and doing one's job. And I'm out here to do my job and to discharge it in a manner which is in the best interests of Canada. And British Columbia and Western Canada are very key. The resources,
You're away with
the
these great
development,
little speeches
the
all
resources, the development, and the potential of Western Canada is fantastic.
One question. I'm going to make you an offer now on behalf of the people of British Columbia. Are you ready to listen to my offer? And will you give it?
Well, I'm ready to listen. I'm always ready to listen.
Okay. We have a railroad that's totally bankrupt. I'd like to have it for $1. You take it over, run it properly like the CN and CPR by and large. I'll give you the railroad for $1.
Have you checked that out with Mr. Bennett?
I'm sure he'd be glad to get rid of it. My thanks to Don Mazenkowski. I'll be back with Marie Peacock, Okalla Women's Correctional Center. That's the old-fashioned name. I can't remember the other name. To tackle some of the problems and get some information about that place after this break. This will be the first time I have interviewed Marie Peacock, who, to give her a proper title, is the director of Lakeside, what?
Correctional Center.
Lakeside Correctional Center, which, as we know, or as we call it, is Okalla Women's Unit. It's within the outside boundaries of the old Okalla in Burnaby. Now, it's a matter of fact and record that there have been problems at Okalla Women's Unit, let's forget the men's unit, for 25 years. It's a matter of fact and record that the facilities there are outdated. It's a matter of fact and record. In fact, there's one little funny story I might tell before I talk to Marie Peacock. In the good old days when they could almost vault the fence, there used to be a sign on the back lane which said, "Caution, escapees cross here." Is that not true, Marie Peacock?
Yes, there was a sign like that at one time.
Have you yet got, just to deal with some very basic facts, a secure perimeter fence around Okalla Women's Unit yet?
The secure perimeter fence was completed approximately August or September, but there are still a few minor corrections that need to be made.
Was that after the time a nosy television reporter called Brian Coxford did a story about throwing tennis balls which may have had drugs inside them over the fence?
Well, that was quite some time ago, but that did happen prior to the fence being completed.
Now, what I'd like to do now is get some basic facts. How many women prisoners do you have there?
We average 63 right now.
63. How many of a staff do you have?
Total of 72 with myself and my deputy director.
So that's a total of 72 overall.
Yes.
What kind of crimes or offences are these women in there for? I mean, the range of them.
Well, there are crimes right from minor crimes to very serious crimes. Anything from a month sentence to penitentiary time.
So it might be a small theft.
Yes.
It might be drug problems.
Yes.
It might be
murder.
Murder? Oh, you don't have lifers in there, do you?
Their lifers remain with us until they're transferred.
They remain with you until they're transferred. Do you still have some of the Freedomite women?
Oh, yes, I have 6 right now.
You have 6 Freedomite women in there?
Yes.
Right at the minute. Now, let's go back to the end of November last year, because I don't necessarily trust the stories I read in the Vancouver Sun or see anywhere else on this matter. Now, you may not want to tell me everything about it, but I'm going to ask you the questions, and perhaps we can help to understand what's going on there and what's needed. What happened in November? End of November?
Toward the end of November, we had what I considered a serious inmate assault. That was an inmate assaulting another inmate. Simultaneously with that, we had a serious fire in one of the units.
An arson fire?
Yes, that's right, an arson fire.
Set by an inmate?
That's right. Under the regulations, we can hold someone in segregation for 24 hours. At the completion of the 24 hours, we have to make a decision. Either they will be charged internally and heard at a internal disciplinary panel, or they will be released from segregation to return to the living unit, or charges may be laid in outside court. So we did have these inmates in segregation for that 24-hour period.
Now, when we're talking about segregation, are we talking about what is commonly called the cow barns?
No, no.
You're talking about segregation cells in your main unit?
That's right.
One person to a cell?
One person to a cell, and we have 10 cells.
Right. So you put them in segregation at that
So we
time?
put them in the arson was being investigated by the RCMP, and the assault charge was going to outside court. So those people were released from segregation. However, we had a lot of difficulty during the time that they were down there with setting more fires. So they were subsequently charged and heard in internal disciplinary hearing, and which resulted in more segregation time.
Given by you as a director?
Well, given by my deputy, but on my authority.
On your authority,
So consequently, the problems increased. We had more attempted fires, and we were having difficulty controlling the situation. My responsibility is, of course, the safekeeping of inmates, but I also have a responsibility to the staff to see that they're safe. And we were having some difficulty with the fact that staff did not feel safe. They were being assaulted, and of course fire is frightening to anyone, staff or inmate. So this was when the problems all started.
Now, by the end of December, somewhere, I was out the country at the time, you had a riot in there, didn't you? Kind of a riot.
Well, at the end of December, on December 31st, we had an attempted riot, I would say, which I would refer to as a disturbance, because there were windows broken and furniture broken, etc., light fixtures. So I refer to that as a disturbance rather than a riot, because they didn't remove plumbing and break walls out, etc., which I would...
That's a riot.
I would refer to that as
It was
a
a bad
riot.
enough disturbance?
Yes, it was.
Now, what happened to these women who had caused the disturbance?
There were 20 women involved, and I only have 10 segregation cells. So I had to resort to using some other facility to hold them in, at least until I was able to find out or clean up the unit that they were in.
So where did you put them then, the other 10?
That's when they were put into the men's segregation unit, which is commonly referred to as the cow barns.
That's when they went over to the men's. And the cow barns are a horrible place.
Yeah, well, of course they're a horrible place.
And they're not that clean.
No, they're not.
And
But they're not unbearable, but they're not clean, and it was not desirable for me to put them there, but I really had no alternative. I had 20 women, and I had no place to put them.
Do you know why? Did you ever... No, let's go through the story, and then I'll ask you the nasty questions. What happened when they came out, when you were bringing them out of segregation sometime early in January? Was there not more trouble then?
Yes, there was.
That's what I'd like to hear about directly from you.
Yes, there was problems. Staff were assaulted with the buckets.
Contents of human excrement,
That's
is
right.
that right?
Yes, that's right.
When they went to bring them out, the human excrement was thrown over them.
That's right.
This was, how many times did this happen? Just once?
Happened to 2 different staff.
Was this female staff or male staff?
It was 1 female and 1 male.
Why did you use men then?
Because of the, when we have extremely difficult people where I have fear and reason to believe that the female staff will be injured, then I'll send a male support staff as a backup.
When you took over Okalla, correct me if I'm wrong, which is about 1977, sometime in 77?
December 77.
There was about 50 staff, of whom 16 were men. Am I right?
There was line staff. There were 48 line staff, 16 of whom were men, that's right. And when I refer to line staff, I refer to those staff who work in the living units with the inmates.
Now, all these men were then removed in the main. In fact, all these men were removed from the staff and you're left with women.
That's right.
Go on.
I do have some male posts, but they are not in the living units.
In other words, those in contact with the women, was this was before Proudfoot, too?
The task force committee study was before Proudfoot, yes.
Now, can women staff handle some of the types of women in the living units in Okalla without themselves being assaulted?
Not without injury. It can't be done. And I say this because I feel that my staff have to be protected. I either have to be concerned about a majority of staff being off on WCB and another majority of staff being off simply because they're too fearful to come to work on occasions. So there are situations when I have to call on male staff backup.
Well, why do women have to be stripped naked? This is one thing which absolutely, I'm sure, horrifies me and people watching. Is it true that in some of these recent occasions, women prisoners were stripped naked and at least one handcuffed by men officials?
Okay, let me tell you about stripping in an institution. It's a routine that when an inmate is admitted to the institution, she is stripped and searched and shampooed, etc.
For obvious reasons.
For obvious reasons.
Cleanliness and drugs.
That's right. That's right. There are occasions during the term of her stay in the institution when we may have to do the same thing for security and safety reasons. On all occasions when inmates are sent to segregation, and again for the same reasons, safety and security, we do strip inmates.
No suicide materials, no drugs.
That's exactly what we're looking for.
Why men? Surely that's abominable.
Okay, yes it is. However, we had one particular inmate who was extremely violent. And as a matter of fact, there's an RCMP officer who has assaulted, and he ended up with a broken nose. So obviously this woman was violent. And we also had a nurse who was seriously assaulted. So I had reason to fear that my female staff would be assaulted. So I sent male staff as backup. They were not to do the stripping.
Did they do the stripping?
They ended up being in the room when the stripping took place, but they didn't actually do the stripping.
One woman only?
There was only one.
Not dozens of them?
No.
I heard some garbage the other day that one woman had been naked in a cell for 2 days and handcuffed. Maybe it's not garbage. Is that true or false?
When these inmates were put back into their cells, stripped, we made the arrangement with them that as soon as you give up all your fire equipment, in other words, your lighters and your matches, because we do not do internal searches. So as soon as you give that up, you'll have your bedding.
Clear. You don't do vaginal examination?
No.
Or rectal examinations?
No.
Are you suggesting that the probabilities are that lighters are secreted on the body?
That's right.
And you say as soon as you surrender your lighters and your matches, you'll get your clothes back?
You'll get your everything back that you would normally have in a segregation cell that isn't inflammable.
How many women were naked in how many cells? And am I talking about segregation cells now?
Segregation cells, and we're talking about 4 inmates.
4 inmates?
3 inmates gave up their fire equipment immediately, and 1 resisted for some time, for I would say maybe 4, 5, maybe even 6 hours.
From the body? This
That's
is where
right,
the others produced it?
Yes, that's right.
It doesn't seem right, the men there, that's the only thing. But I suppose for sheer security
well, I had to make a choice. I had to make a choice either that my staff would be injured, or
the place burned down,
or use male backup.
Webster and Marie Peacock, director of the Okalla Women's Unit, after the break. Marie Peacock is the director of the Okalla Women's Unit. How much sickness do you have among your staff? Is it not a fact that you have the highest rate of sickness among your staff in any segment of the BC government operations?
I have a very high sick rate, at least what I consider to be a very high sick rate. We're averaging approximately 13 days per staff, excuse me, per year. I haven't specifically made statistical studies to find out if that is higher than any other institution.
I know it is.
But I do know that it's very high.
What do you do though with it all?
I also do know that that's historically true of the female institution.
Do you get replacement staff when you get people off on compensation cases for month after month after month with bad backs or injuries?
Yes, I can have an auxiliary backfill, but there's problems with that too, because I'm taking a green person from the street who hasn't got the experience and requires considerable training before they can really get into the job. So that is a problem. If I have 5 or 6 people off, then I've got 5 or 6 auxiliaries.
How many people do you all have on at a time? If you've got how many line staff in the living units? 48?
We have 48 total to cover 3 shifts, 365 days of a year.
And they work 8 hours and 15 minutes a day.
That's right.
What does that extra 15 minutes do to their time and their holidays?
Well, they accumulate that time, that hour and 15 minutes, as a matter of fact, because the contract calls for a 7-hour day. They accumulate that time, and they take blocks of time off 2 weeks every 3 months, and that's...
You're telling me every staff person gets 2 weeks off every 3 months?
Yes, and that's not counting their annual leave.
All right, now what about the Proudfoot report? Madam Justice Proudfoot did a report, and what has been done really, if that place can be improved at all, what has been done since then?
Most of the recommendations have been implemented. Some of them are being implemented, and there are, excuse me, there are a couple that have not been implemented.
Such as what? I know the place has been repainted.
Yes, the place has been redecorated. The beauty parlor has completely been redecorated and refurnished. We have new floors and a new paint going up.
But you have very unsatisfactory educational facilities, is that correct?
Well, we have a trailer for a school room, so it's not an unsatisfactory
Do you have
facility.
qualified teachers?
We have just contracted a teacher, not a teacher, but a coordinator from Douglas College, a degreed person who will be coordinating the entire educational program, which will include academic, vocational, and social education.
How many of the women are interested in education? In your average, especially among your repeaters in your Okalla population?
We don't seem to ever be able to get more than 5 or 6 in school at one time.
5 or 6 out of 63. And the rest, if you put on educational programs, they won't come?
Well, they don't show the interest, and we haven't made it compulsory.
Will you make it compulsory?
Well, it depends how much of a variety we can give them. If we have 5 or 10 going to life skills, and we have 5 or 6 going to 2 or 3 different aspects of the educational program. If we have some going to the tailoring shop to learn sewing.
Do you have a tailoring shop now?
Oh, yes, we have.
You still have a sewing program?
Oh, yes, we have.
Is that well attended?
It's well attended, and it's an excellent program.
Is the food foul?
The food is not foul. We have, as a matter of fact, we have a qualified chef plus a full-time food service officer.
Biggest complaint against you, Marie Peacock, and I've seen this endlessly, is that you will not meet with the inmates. They're always demanding meetings. They can't meet with you. You won't meet with the inmates. What is this? Is this your proper duty to stand back and let other people deal? Or could you have diffused all this by saying, I'll see you now? Don't you ever see the inmates?
Oh, yes, I see the inmates, and I see them frequently. I see them when I make rounds. I think the complaint was, as it was interpreted to me by the inmates, was, we want you to attend our inmate meetings. We don't want your representative to attend. So I've made a commitment that I'll be the one who will attend. Their needs have been met. They have meetings once a month with my representative, but they wanted me to be there, so I've made that commitment. That
You've given in on that?
I'll be the one to meet with them.
You've given in on that?
Yes, as a matter of fact, I have.
Your position was, no, I'm running this
That's
prison.
right.
You will meet with my deputy or
That's
whomsoever
right.
I send.
That's right.
But in an attempt now to kind of defuse the situation, you're going to meet with them. You know, I don't remember Teresa Brewer.
Yes.
Where is she now?
I believe she's still in Kingston. She may be out on parole.
Have you still got people in there who are as tough as Teresa Brewer was?
Tougher.
Tougher than Brewer. Do you have a proper intercom system so that guards can summon help properly when, or the line staff can summon help properly when they need it?
Oh, yes. We have probably one of the most modern communication systems that I've ever seen.
Last time I looked into it, it didn't work.
It's worn on a belt, and it's a little device not much larger than a cassette tape. All they have to do is press the button, and the alarm rings in the key control office.
This is new?
Oh, yes, it is. I ordered it about 1.5 years ago, and I've just got it.
What about the other improvements promised endlessly by BC, the building corporation? How much have they got to do yet?
Oh, they still have a considerable amount of work to
Should
do.
that place, even though you are a civil servant, I'm going to ask you this, and I'm sure you'll tell me, is it possible to run a half-decent women's correctional center in that accommodation in Okalla?
The facility is inadequate. There would be just no way of disputing the fact that the facility is inadequate because of the type of people that we have. We have remands.
Okay, enough. I'd forgotten another allegation which I must put to you. An allegation that you kept a woman in a monkey cage for 30 days. What is that allegation?
That's not a true allegation. She may have had a consecutive sentence which would have given her 30
But this was a small special monkey cage Sunday. Is this such a thing?
No, we don't keep anyone in a monkey cage for 30 days.
Do you have a monkey cage is a segregation cell?
We have a special segregation cell with bars in it as well as just the bare walls. And that special segregation cell is for extremely suicidal people, so we can have
Is it big enough to stand up in?
Oh, yes.
It's a normal size maximum cell?
Yes, it is, yes.
And they could be in there consecutively and legally for 30 days?
They could be, but it's never happened.
Mm-hmm. Do you let activist groups in to whip up the inmates? I know they want to get in. Do you let them in?
Well, if they present a program to me that I think the inmates will want to have, yeah, so I'll allow that.
If I may be bold for my age, we'll let some of these groups in. You're daft. Yeah. Marie Peacock, I'm grateful for your frankness and for putting your point of view about Okalla's women's unit on the record. Next, what is it? It's Linda and myself after the break. Okay. Take it away.